The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla walked briskly through the rose garden, her heels clicking against the stone pathway. She had been looking forward to this particular Tuesday morning for weeks. Today marked the annual Royal Children's Garden Party, an event she had personally organized to bring together young members of various noble families, and the royal children for what she hoped would become a cherished tradition. Camilla adjusted her pearl necklace nervously as she surveyed the preparations. White marquee tents dotted the lawn like elegant mushrooms, each one carefully positioned to catch the morning light. Tables laden with delicate finger sandwiches, colorful macarons, and crystal glasses of fresh lemonade awaited the arrival of nearly 50 children from prominent families across the United Kingdom. This event was particularly important to Camilla because it represented her vision of modernizing certain royal traditions while maintaining their essential dignity and charm. As she reviewed the final details with the head butler, Camilla noticed 9-year-old Princess Charlotte approaching from the direction of the main castle. The young princess moved with the natural grace that seemed to run in the Windsor bloodline, her navy blue dress perfectly pressed, and her golden hair neatly braided with small white ribbons. Charlotte carried herself with a confidence that both impressed and occasionally concerned the adults around her, as she possessed a remarkable awareness of her position within the royal hierarchy despite her tender age. "Good morning, Charlotte dear," Camilla called out warmly, genuinely pleased to see her step-granddaughter. "Are you excited about meeting all the children today? I've arranged for some lovely games and activities that I think you'll enjoy immensely." Charlotte approached with a polite smile, but Camilla immediately sensed something different in the child's demeanor. There was a certain stiffness in her posture, a careful calculation in her movements that seemed unusual even for someone who had been raised with royal protocol from birth. The little princess curtsied properly, as she had been taught, but there was something almost mechanical about the gesture that made Camilla pause. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Charlotte replied, her voice carrying the proper tone of respect, yet somehow lacking the warmth that usually characterized their interactions. "I'm sure the party will be very nice. Papa told me I should represent our family well today." The emphasis Charlotte placed on "our family" was subtle but unmistakable. Camilla felt a small chill despite the warm morning air. She had worked so hard to build genuine relationships with William's children, understanding that her role as their step-grandmother was delicate and required patience, sensitivity, and, above all, respect for their mother's memory and their father's position as heir to the throne. "Of course, darling," Camilla responded carefully, choosing her words with the diplomatic skill that had served her well throughout her years in royal life. "Your father is quite right. But I also want you to have fun today. These events are meant to be enjoyed, not just endured." Charlotte nodded, but her blue eyes held a sharpness that seemed far beyond her years. "I understand my duties, Your Majesty. I always have. Papa has made sure of that, just as Mama would have wanted." The mention of Diana was like a sudden crack of thunder in what had been a peaceful morning. Camilla felt her chest tighten slightly, not from guilt or defensiveness, but from the complex web of emotions that any reference to William's late wife inevitably stirred. She had long ago made peace with her complicated history, but she also understood that for the children, their mother's legacy was sacred and not to be diminished in any way. "Your mother would indeed be very proud of how beautifully you've grown up," Camilla said sincerely, meaning every word. "She raised remarkable children, and that's evident in everything you do." For a moment, Charlotte's carefully controlled expression softened, revealing the child beneath the royal composure. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by something that looked almost like suspicion. "Mama always said that family comes first, before everything else. She said we should never forget who we are or where we come from." The conversation was taking on undertones that made Camilla increasingly uncomfortable, not because she felt threatened, but because she recognized that Charlotte was operating from a script that someone had clearly provided. The child's words were too carefully chosen, too loaded with meaning for a 9-year-old to have developed independently. "That's absolutely true, Charlotte," Camilla agreed, trying to steer the conversation towards safer ground. "Family is indeed the most important thing. That's why I'm so grateful to be part of yours, even if my role is different from what you might have originally expected." Charlotte tilted her head slightly, studying Camilla with an intensity that was both impressive and unsettling. But you're not really part of our family, are you? I mean, not in the same way as Papa or Grandpapa or Uncle Harry used to be before he left. You're Papa's father's wife, which makes you something different. The clinical precision of Charlotte's observation struck Camilla like a physical blow, not because it was cruel, but because it was delivered with such matter-of-fact clarity. Here was a child who had obviously been thinking deeply about family dynamics and royal hierarchies, and had reached conclusions that, while technically accurate, revealed a sophisticated understanding of the complex relationships within the royal household. You're quite right to think carefully about these things, Charlotte, Camilla replied, her voice steady despite the emotional turbulence she felt. Families can be complicated, especially families like ours. But different doesn't necessarily mean less important or less loving. I care about you and your brothers very much, regardless of the technical nature of our relationship. Charlotte considered this response with the seriousness of a much older person, her small face reflecting an internal debate. Mama's brother, Uncle Charles, told me that real family is about blood and shared history, not just marriage certificates and new arrangements. He said Mama would want us to remember that distinction. The mention of Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, sent a wave of understanding through Camilla's mind. She had long suspected that certain members of Diana's family maintained reservations about the current royal arrangements, but she hadn't realized that these sentiments were being shared with the children. The complexity of the situation suddenly became much clearer and far more delicate than she had initially understood. Uncle Charles loved your mother very much, Camilla said carefully, and it's natural that he wants to honor her memory and protect what she valued most. But love isn't something that gets smaller when it's shared with more people. Your father's happiness doesn't diminish your mother's importance in your lives. Charlotte's expression remained thoughtful but guarded. Papa seems happy, she acknowledged, but sometimes I wonder if he remembers what Mama would think about all the changes. She had very specific ideas about how things should be done, especially when it came to us children. The weight of Diana's legacy pressed heavily on the conversation. Camilla understood that she was not just speaking with a precocious 9-year-old, but with a child who carried the expectations and memories of one of the most beloved figures in modern royal history. The challenge wasn't just winning Charlotte's affection, it was finding a way to honor the past while building a positive future. As they continued walking through the garden, other staff members began to notice the intense conversation taking place between the queen and the young princess. The head gardener paused in his work with the hedge trimmers, the catering staff slowed their preparations, and, most significantly, the royal protection officers began to pay closer attention to what was unfolding. Among these officers was Inspector Sarah Mitchell, a seasoned professional who had been assigned to the royal family for over 15 years. She had witnessed numerous family dynamics, public moments, and private tensions during her career, but something about the current interaction between Camilla and Charlotte was setting off her professional instincts. The body language, the controlled voices, and the subtle but unmistakable tension in the air suggested that this was more than a simple conversation between family members. Inspector Mitchell positioned herself at a discreet distance, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to allow the conversation to continue naturally. Her training had taught her to read situations quickly and accurately, and what she was observing suggested a complex emotional dynamic that could potentially escalate beyond a simple disagreement. Charlotte, Camilla continued, her voice taking on a slightly firmer tone, I want you to understand something very important. I would never try to replace your mother or diminish her memory in any way. But I am part of this family now, and that means I have both rights and responsibilities regarding all of you children. Your grandfather, the king, has made that very clear. The mention of King Charles seemed to shift something in Charlotte's demeanor. Her small shoulders straightened, and her chin lifted in a gesture that was pure Windsor pride. Grandpapa loves us very much, she said, her voice carrying a new edge, but he also loved Mama. Sometimes I think he forgets that we remember everything she taught us about dignity and proper behavior. Camilla felt a flash of irritation, carefully controlled but unmistakable. The implication that she somehow lacked dignity or proper behavior was subtle but clear, and it revealed a level of sophisticated manipulation that was troubling in someone so young. "I'm sure your grandfather remembers your mother with great fondness," she replied, her own voice taking on a cooler tone. "But he also expects all of us to move forward in a way that serves the monarchy and the country." "The monarchy," Charlotte repeated, as if testing the weight of the words. "Mama always said the monarchy was about service, not about personal happiness or convenience. She said sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good." The conversation had moved into territory that was both philosophically complex and emotionally charged. Camilla recognized that she was no longer simply dealing with a child's questions about family dynamics. She was engaging with someone who had been carefully taught a particular interpretation of royal duty and family loyalty that cast doubt on recent changes within the royal household. Inspector Mitchell noticed the shift in tone and moved slightly closer, her hand instinctively moving toward her radio. The conversation was remaining civil, but the underlying tension was becoming more apparent, and she had learned through experience that royal family disagreements could escalate quickly and with significant consequences. The other children began arriving for the garden party, their excited voices and laughter creating a cheerful backdrop that contrasted sharply with the serious conversation taking place between Camilla and Charlotte. Young lords and ladies from prominent families arrived with their parents, all dressed in their finest clothes and displaying their best manners for what promised to be a memorable royal occasion. As the first guests approached the garden area, Charlotte seemed to make a deliberate decision. She stepped back from Camilla and assumed the perfect posture of a young royal receiving guests, her expression transforming into the practiced smile that had been captured in countless photographs. But her eyes remained fixed on Camilla with an intensity that suggested their conversation was far from over. "I suppose we should welcome our guests now," Charlotte said with perfect propriety, but her tone carried an unmistakable challenge. "After all, representing the royal family properly is what's most important, isn't it, Your Majesty?" Camilla felt the weight of multiple gazes upon her, the arriving guests, the staff, the security personnel, and, most intensely, the piercing blue eyes of a 9-year-old girl who had just thrown down a gauntlet with the precision of a seasoned diplomat. The garden party was about to begin, but it was clear that the real drama was just getting started. The afternoon sun had reached its peak as more than 40 children and their parents filled the carefully manicured gardens of Windsor Castle. The sound of polite conversation and gentle laughter created exactly the atmosphere Camilla had envisioned when she first planned this garden party. Children in their finest clothing moved gracefully between the white marquee tents, sampling delicate pastries and participating in carefully organized games that had been designed to entertain while maintaining appropriate royal decorum. Camilla moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting each family with warmth and genuine interest in their children's accomplishments. Lady Pemberton's daughter had just received a scholarship to study music at a prestigious academy. Young Lord Ashford had recently won a national equestrian competition. The Duchess of Marlborough's twin sons were excelling in their studies at Eton. These conversations came naturally to Camilla, who had spent decades perfecting the art of making each person feel valued and heard during public gatherings. But throughout these pleasant interactions, she remained acutely aware of Princess Charlotte's presence. The young girl moved through the party with remarkable poise, engaging appropriately with each guest while maintaining the perfect balance of friendliness and royal dignity. To the casual observer, Charlotte appeared to be enjoying herself immensely, laughing at the right moments, asking thoughtful questions about other children's interests, and demonstrating the natural charm that seemed to be hereditary among the Windsor children. However, Camilla noticed subtle details that revealed Charlotte's true state of mind. The way the child's eyes would seek her out across the garden, holding her gaze for just a moment longer than necessary. The careful positioning that ensured Charlotte was always within earshot when Camilla spoke with other guests. The slight emphasis Charlotte placed on certain words when discussing her family or her mother's teachings with the other children. These behaviors suggested a level of strategic thinking that was both impressive and concerning in someone so young. Inspector Mitchell had also picked up on these subtle dynamics. As the senior protection officer on duty, she had positioned herself where she could observe both Camilla and Charlotte while maintaining the discreet presence that royal events required. Her years of experience had taught her that family tensions could manifest in unexpected ways, especially when combined with the pressures of public appearances and the complex emotions that surrounded royal protocol. The inspector noticed how other members of the security team had also begun to pay closer attention to the interaction between the Queen and Princess Charlotte. Inspector Davies, who had been assigned specifically to the Cambridge children, had moved to a position where he could intervene quickly if necessary. The head of palace security had been discreetly notified that the situation required monitoring, though no one expected any immediate crisis to develop. As the party progressed, Charlotte began to demonstrate her sophisticated understanding of royal dynamics in increasingly subtle ways. When Lady Pemberton asked about the princess's favorite subjects in school, Charlotte's response included a thoughtful reflection on history lessons that emphasized the importance of learning from previous generations. When young Lord Ashford inquired about her hobbies, Charlotte mentioned her love for looking through photograph albums that her father kept, particularly those featuring her mother's charitable work. These responses were perfectly appropriate and genuinely charming, but they served a dual purpose that Camilla recognized immediately. Charlotte was reinforcing themes of family history, maternal legacy, and the importance of remembering the past, while simultaneously presenting herself as a child who had been properly educated in royal values. The implicit message was clear. She understood her position, her heritage, and her responsibilities better than anyone might assume. The tension escalated subtly when the Duchess of Marlborough made an innocent comment about how wonderful it was to see the royal family flourishing under the current arrangements. "Your Majesty," she said to Camilla with genuine warmth, "this garden party is absolutely delightful. It's clear that you've brought such positive energy to royal family events. The children seem to be thriving under your influence." Charlotte, who had been engaged in conversation with the Duchess's twin sons nearby, turned her attention to the exchange with obvious interest. Her young face maintained its polite expression, but Camilla could see the sharpness in her eyes as she processed the Duchess's words about positive influence and current arrangements. "That's very kind of you to say," Camilla replied graciously, though she felt increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The children have always been remarkable. They simply needed the right opportunities to shine, which their father has always provided beautifully. Charlotte stepped forward with the timing of someone who had been waiting for precisely this moment. "Papa is wonderful," she agreed with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He learned everything about being a father from watching his own parents, especially Mama. She had very specific ideas about how royal children should be raised and what values we should embrace." The Duchess smiled benevolently, unaware of the underlying currents in the conversation. "Your mother was indeed a remarkable woman, Princess Charlotte. Her dedication to charitable causes and her natural way with people were truly inspiring." "Yes," Charlotte continued, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had obviously given this topic considerable thought. "Mama always said that royal duty meant putting the needs of the people before our own comfort or preferences. She believed that every decision we make should be measured against whether it serves the greater good or just makes us personally happy." The philosophical sophistication of Charlotte's response impressed the adults present, but Camilla recognized the pointed nature of the child's words. The distinction between serving the greater good and pursuing personal happiness was clearly meant to reflect on recent changes within the royal family structure. "Your mother was very wise," Camilla said carefully, choosing her words with diplomatic precision. "And I'm sure she would be proud to see how thoughtfully you've learned those lessons. But she would also want you to understand that sometimes serving the greater good requires accepting changes that might initially feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar." Charlotte tilted her head with an expression of innocent curiosity that didn't fool anyone who was paying close attention. "That's interesting, Your Majesty. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Mama's brother, Uncle Charles, was just telling me about some of the letters Mama wrote when I was very small. She had strong feelings about how the monarchy should evolve and what kinds of changes would genuinely serve the people versus those that might just appear to serve the people while actually serving other interests." The mention of private letters from Diana, shared through her brother Charles Spencer, sent a wave of concern through Camilla that she worked hard to conceal. The idea that Charlotte was being provided with her mother's private thoughts about royal policy and family dynamics suggested a level of adult manipulation that was deeply troubling. Inspector Mitchell stepped closer, her professional instincts alerting her to the escalating tension. She could see that what had begun as a polite conversation between family members was evolving into something more complex and potentially problematic. The inspector's radio crackled softly with a status check from her colleagues, and she responded with a subtle code indicating that the situation required continued monitoring. "Princess Charlotte," Camilla said, her voice taking on a firmer tone while remaining appropriate for their public setting. "I think it's important for children to learn about their family history, but it's equally important to understand that adults sometimes share information that requires proper context and mature interpretation." Charlotte's response demonstrated a level of preparation that suggested this conversation had been anticipated and rehearsed. "Oh, I understand context very well, Your Majesty. Papa has always been honest with us about complicated situations. He explained that sometimes people have different opinions about what's best for the family, and that those differences can create tension even when everyone has good intentions." The crowd around them had begun to sense that something significant was occurring, though most guests remained focused on their own conversations and the ongoing party activities. However, several of the more perceptive adults had noticed the intensity of the exchange between Camilla and Charlotte, and the way the security personnel had subtly repositioned themselves. Young Lord Ashford, who was particularly observant for his age, whispered to one of the Duchess's sons, "Princess Charlotte seems rather serious today, doesn't she? I wonder if everything is all right." His companion shrugged, more interested in the elaborate dessert table than in royal family dynamics. But the comment reflected the growing awareness that the atmosphere had shifted. Camilla realized that the conversation had reached a point where continued engagement in the current setting would be inappropriate and potentially damaging. The presence of other families and the formal nature of the garden party demanded a different approach, one that would allow both her and Charlotte to maintain their dignity while avoiding any public display of family discord. "Charlotte, dear," she said with renewed warmth, making a conscious decision to change tactics. "I can see that you've been thinking deeply about many important topics. Perhaps we could continue our conversation in a more private setting later, where we can really explore these ideas without distracting from our lovely party." But Charlotte seemed reluctant to let the moment pass. Her blue eyes held Camilla's gaze with remarkable steadiness as she considered her response. The child appeared to be weighing her options, calculating the potential consequences of pushing the conversation further versus accepting the offered diplomatic retreat. "I would like that very much, Your Majesty," Charlotte finally replied, her voice carrying a mixture of politeness and determination. "There are indeed many things I'd like to discuss with you when we have more privacy. Papa always says that honest conversation is the foundation of good relationships, even when the topics might be difficult or uncomfortable." The emphasis Charlotte placed on honest conversation and difficult topics left no doubt that she intended to use any private meeting to address her concerns more directly. Camilla felt a mixture of apprehension and grudging admiration for the child's strategic thinking. Charlotte was clearly operating from a well-developed plan, one that had been carefully thought through and possibly guided by adults who had their own agendas regarding current royal arrangements. As if sensing the need for intervention, Inspector Davies approached their small group with the practiced casual manner that security personnel use to defuse potentially problematic situations. "Your Majesty, Princess Charlotte, I wanted to let you know that the falconry demonstration is about to begin on the East Lawn. I believe several of the children were particularly excited about that activity." The mention of the falconry demonstration provided a perfect opportunity for both Camilla and Charlotte to step back from their intense conversation while maintaining their public personas. The other children immediately expressed enthusiasm about seeing the birds, and the adults began moving toward the demonstration area. But as they walked across the garden, Inspector Mitchell noticed that Charlotte deliberately positioned herself so that she would be walking beside Camilla. The child seemed determined to use every available moment to continue their complex psychological dance, even in this more casual setting. "Your Majesty," Charlotte said quietly, her voice just loud enough for Camilla to hear, but not so loud as to attract attention from other guests. I want you to know that I don't dislike you personally. You seem like a very nice person, and I can see that you care about Papa's happiness." Camilla felt a moment of relief at what seemed like a more conciliatory tone, but she remained cautious. Charlotte's diplomatic sophistication suggested that even apparent concessions might be strategic moves in a larger conversation. "Thank you, Charlotte. That means a great deal to me. I hope you know that I care about your happiness as well, and your brother's. Nothing would make me happier than to have a genuinely warm relationship with all of you." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the sincerity of Camilla's words. "I believe that's true," she said after a moment. "But I also think that sometimes what makes people happy in the short term isn't necessarily what's best for everyone in the long term. Mama taught me that real love sometimes means making difficult choices for the greater good." The conversation was moving into territory that felt increasingly philosophical and complex for a public setting. Camilla realized that Charlotte was not going to be easily satisfied with simple reassurances or diplomatic pleasantries. The child clearly intended to have a substantial conversation about family dynamics, royal responsibilities, and competing loyalties, regardless of the setting or the presence of other people. As they reached the falconry demonstration area, Inspector Mitchell positioned herself where she could observe both the performance and the ongoing interaction between Camilla and Charlotte. Her radio crackled again with status checks, and she began to consider whether it might be necessary to find a way to separate the two participants in this increasingly complex conversation before it escalated beyond manageable boundaries. The falconry demonstration provided a temporary respite from the intense conversation between Camilla and Princess Charlotte, but the underlying tension remained palpable to those who were paying close attention. The master falconer, a distinguished gentleman named Robert Thornfield who had been training birds of prey for royal events for over 3 decades, commanded the attention of both children and adults as he explained the ancient art of falconry and its historical significance to the British monarchy. For centuries, Mr. Thornfield explained to his captivated audience, falconry has been known as the sport of kings. These magnificent birds represent the perfect partnership between human intelligence and natural instinct, working together to achieve goals that neither could accomplish alone. Princess Charlotte listened intently to the presentation, but Inspector Mitchell noticed that her attention seemed divided. The young princess was absorbing the information about the birds while simultaneously maintaining awareness of Camilla's position and reactions. It was as if Charlotte was operating on multiple levels simultaneously, participating appropriately in the public event while continuing to process the complex emotional and political dynamics of her earlier conversation. When Mr. Thornfield called for volunteers to wear the falconer's glove and allow one of the smaller hawks to perch on their arm, Charlotte immediately stepped forward with the confidence that characterized everything she did. Several other children also volunteered, but there was something about Charlotte's demeanor that suggested she saw this as more than just an entertaining activity. "Princess Charlotte," Mr. Thornfield said with obvious pleasure, "it would be my honor to introduce you to Artemis, one of our most intelligent and well-trained hawks. She's quite particular about whom she chooses to trust, but I have a feeling you two will get along beautifully." As Charlotte carefully put on the thick leather glove and extended her arm as instructed, Camilla watched with a mixture of admiration and continued concern. The child's natural grace and fearlessness were evident as the hawk settled onto her glove with elegant precision. Charlotte's face lit up with genuine delight at the experience, revealing the normal 9-year-old girl beneath her sophisticated exterior. "She's beautiful," Charlotte breathed, her voice filled with wonder as she studied the hawk's keen eyes and powerful talons. "How long does it take to build trust with a bird like this?" "That's an excellent question, Your Highness," Mr. Thornfield replied. "Trust with these creatures is earned through consistency, patience, and respect for their natural instincts. You cannot force a hawk to trust you, nor can you trick one into loyalty. They respond only to genuine intentions and proven reliability over time." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully, and Camilla couldn't help but wonder if the child was drawing parallels between the falconer's explanation and their own family dynamics. The metaphor of trust, consistency, and respect for natural instincts seemed remarkably applicable to their current situation. "What happens if someone tries to rush the process?" Charlotte asked, her question seemingly innocent, but loaded with potential meaning. If someone tries to establish trust too quickly or in the wrong way? Mr. Thornfield considered the question seriously, unaware of any subtext, but pleased by Charlotte's genuine interest. Well, Your Highness, rushing the process typically results in failure. The bird will become confused, possibly frightened, and will definitely not develop the deep trust that makes true partnership possible. Patience and respect for the natural order of things is essential. Charlotte's eyes briefly met Camilla's across the small crowd, and there was no mistaking the significance of the exchange. The child had managed to extract a metaphorical lesson about trust and relationships that could easily be applied to their personal situation, and she wanted to ensure that Camilla understood the message. Inspector Mitchell observed this silent communication between Charlotte and Camilla with growing concern. The sophistication of Charlotte's behavior suggested that she was being guided by adults who had equipped her with strategies for this kind of psychological maneuvering. The inspector began to consider whether intervention might be necessary to prevent the situation from escalating further. After several more children had the opportunity to interact with the birds, the demonstration concluded with enthusiastic applause from the entire group. As the guests began to move toward the afternoon tea service that had been set up in the main marquee, Charlotte approached Camilla with the same determined expression she had worn throughout the day. "Your Majesty," Charlotte said quietly, her voice carefully modulated to avoid attracting attention from nearby guests. "I found Mr. Thornfield's explanation about trust very interesting. It made me think about how relationships in our family might benefit from similar principles." Camilla felt her patience beginning to wear thin, despite her genuine desire to maintain a positive relationship with Charlotte. The child's persistent attempts to turn every interaction into a lesson about family dynamics was becoming exhausting, and the public nature of their setting made it impossible to address the underlying issues directly. "Charlotte," Camilla replied, her voice carrying a slight edge that she immediately worked to soften. "You're clearly a very thoughtful child, and I appreciate that you're trying to understand complex family relationships. But I think it might be better if we save these important conversations for a time when we can speak more privately." But Charlotte seemed unwilling to accept this diplomatic deflection. Her blue eyes held a determination that was remarkable in someone so young, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of careful preparation. "I understand the importance of privacy, Your Majesty," Charlotte said with perfect politeness. "But I also think that sometimes private conversations can be used to avoid addressing important truths that everyone already knows. Mama always taught me that royal duty means being honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable." The reference to Diana's teachings struck Camilla as particularly unfair, given that Charlotte had no direct memory of most of her mother's guidance, and was clearly repeating lessons that had been interpreted and presented to her by adults with their own agendas. The manipulation inherent in the situation was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. "Your mother was indeed a woman of great integrity," Camilla replied carefully, aware that several guests were beginning to notice the intensity of their conversation. But she also understood the importance of appropriate timing and setting for serious discussions. Charlotte's response revealed the extent of her preparation and the coaching she had clearly received. "Actually, Your Majesty, I've been reading some of Mama's letters and diary entries that Uncle Charles shared with Papa and me. She wrote quite a lot about the importance of addressing family issues directly rather than allowing them to fester beneath the surface. She believed that avoiding difficult conversations often made problems worse, not better." The mention of Diana's private letters and diary entries being shared with Charlotte sent alarm bells ringing through Camilla's mind. The idea that a 9-year-old child was being exposed to her mother's most private thoughts about family conflicts and royal politics was deeply disturbing, regardless of the motivations of those providing the information. Inspector Mitchell had moved close enough to hear portions of the conversation, and she immediately recognized the potential seriousness of the situation. The inspector discreetly activated her radio to alert her colleagues that the interaction between Camilla and Charlotte was escalating beyond normal family disagreement into territory that might require intervention. "Princess Charlotte," Camilla said, her voice taking on a firmer tone despite her awareness of their public setting. I think it's inappropriate for a child your age to be burdened with adult concerns that you may not fully understand. Your mother's private thoughts were meant for adult consideration, not for influencing a young person's perspective on current family relationships. Charlotte's response demonstrated that she was prepared for this line of reasoning. Papa doesn't think I'm too young to understand important family matters. He says that as a future member of the working royal family, I need to develop mature judgment about relationships and responsibilities. He's been very honest with me about the challenges our family has faced and continues to face. The conversation had reached a point where Camilla felt she had no choice but to address Charlotte's behavior more directly, despite the public setting and potential consequences. The child's sophisticated manipulation tactics and obvious adult coaching had created a situation that could not be allowed to continue without clear boundaries being established. "Charlotte," Camilla said, her voice carrying unmistakable authority, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. I understand that you have concerns about family dynamics and that you've been encouraged to express those concerns. But this kind of conversation is not appropriate for a public event, and it's certainly not appropriate for a child to conduct psychological warfare with an adult family member." The directness of Camilla's response seemed to surprise Charlotte, who had clearly expected to continue operating within the bounds of polite conversation. For the first time during their extended interaction, the child appeared uncertain about how to proceed, her carefully maintained composure showing slight cracks. Inspector Mitchell immediately stepped forward, her professional instincts recognizing that the conversation had crossed a line that required intervention. "Your Majesty, Princess Charlotte," she said with the practiced calm that characterized royal protection officers in delicate situations, "I believe the photography session for the official party pictures is about to begin. Perhaps we should move toward the designated area so that all the guests can participate." The mention of official photographs provided both Camilla and Charlotte with an opportunity to step back from their confrontation while maintaining their public dignity. However, the inspector could see that neither participant was entirely satisfied with leaving their disagreement unresolved. As they moved toward the photography area, Charlotte walked beside her step-grandmother with perfect propriety, but her voice carried a quiet intensity that made clear her determination to continue their conversation at a later time. "Your Majesty," Charlotte said softly, "I want you to know that I don't consider our conversation to be warfare of any kind. I simply believe that honest discussion is necessary for building genuine relationships. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps we should examine why truth feels threatening." Camilla felt a flash of genuine anger at the child's words, recognizing in them the sophisticated manipulation tactics that could only have been taught by adults who had their own agenda regarding royal family dynamics. The fact that Charlotte was being used as a vehicle for other people's grievances and political concerns was both tragic and infuriating. "Princess Charlotte," Camilla replied quietly but firmly, "I am not threatened by truth. I am concerned about a young girl who has been encouraged to engage in adult conflicts that she should be protected from. There is a difference between honest conversation and strategic manipulation, and I hope that someday you'll understand that distinction." As they reached the photography area where the other guests were gathering for the official pictures that would commemorate the garden party, both Camilla and Charlotte prepared to resume their public personas. But the underlying tension between them remained unresolved, and Inspector Mitchell could see that the situation would require careful monitoring as the day progressed. The photographer, a distinguished professional who had been documenting royal events for many years, began organizing the group for what he hoped would be a series of charming pictures capturing the success of the garden party. But several of the adults present had begun to sense that something significant had occurred between the Queen and Princess Charlotte, and the atmosphere was charged with unspoken questions and concerns. As the camera clicked and the guests smiled for posterity, Inspector Mitchell positioned herself where she could observe both Camilla and Charlotte while maintaining her professional discretion. The inspector knew that the events of the afternoon had created a situation that would require careful handling by senior royal staff, and she began mentally preparing the report that would need to be filed about the unprecedented confrontation between a reigning queen and a 9-year-old princess who had clearly been prepared for psychological warfare. The afternoon was drawing toward its carefully orchestrated conclusion when Inspector Mitchell made the decision that would transform a tense family disagreement into a moment of genuine crisis. The official photographs had been completed, and guests were beginning to gather their children and prepare for departure when Charlotte made one final attempt to continue her psychological campaign against Camilla. The young princess approached the queen as she was saying goodbye to the Duchess of Marlborough and her family, timing her approach with the precision that had characterized her behavior throughout the entire afternoon. Charlotte waited until Camilla was engaged in polite conversation about future social events before stepping into the conversation with apparent innocence. "Your Majesty," Charlotte said sweetly, her voice carrying the perfect tone of a polite child seeking to join an adult conversation. "The Duchess was asking about our family traditions. I was wondering if you could tell her about how you've been working to honor Mama's legacy while also establishing new traditions of your own." The question was masterfully crafted to appear innocent while actually forcing Camilla into an impossible position. Any response would either diminish Diana's memory or acknowledge that Camilla was somehow competing with or replacing the beloved late princess. The sophistication of the trap revealed the extent of Charlotte's preparation and coaching. The Duchess of Marlborough, completely unaware of the undercurrents in the conversation, smiled benevolently at what she perceived as a charming family interaction. "What a thoughtful question, Princess Charlotte. It must be wonderful to see how beautifully your family has evolved while honoring such an important legacy." Camilla felt the weight of multiple gazes upon her, not just from the Duchess and Charlotte, but from other departing guests who had paused to listen to what appeared to be a sweet family moment. Inspector Mitchell, who had been monitoring the situation throughout the afternoon, recognized immediately that Charlotte had created a public moment that could not be handled with the diplomatic deflection that had been used earlier. "Princess Charlotte," Camilla said, her voice carefully controlled but carrying an unmistakable edge, "I think you're asking questions that are far too complex for a social gathering like this. These are conversations that should take place privately within our family, not in front of our guests." But Charlotte pressed forward with the relentless determination that had characterized her behavior all afternoon. "But, Your Majesty," she said with perfect innocence, "Papa always says that our family's relationship with the public is built on transparency and authenticity. Shouldn't we be able to discuss how we honor family traditions openly and honestly?" The reference to William's teachings about transparency struck Camilla as particularly unfair, since Charlotte was clearly using her father's guidance to justify behavior that he would never have approved. The child was manipulating legitimate royal principles to support her personal agenda, demonstrating a level of sophisticated reasoning that was both impressive and deeply concerning. "Princess Charlotte," Camilla replied, her patience finally exhausted, "you are deliberately misrepresenting your father's teachings to create conflict in an inappropriate setting. This behavior is unacceptable, and it needs to stop immediately." The directness of Camilla's rebuke clearly surprised Charlotte, who had obviously expected to continue operating within the bounds of polite conversation. But, rather than backing down, the child seemed to interpret the confrontation as permission to abandon diplomatic niceties and address her concerns more directly. "I'm not trying to create conflict, Your Majesty," Charlotte said, her voice taking on a cooler tone that revealed the adult coaching behind her behavior. "I'm trying to understand why honest questions about family relationships make you so uncomfortable. Mama always said that people who get defensive about their choices usually have something to hide." The conversation had crossed every line of appropriate behavior between a child and an adult family member. Inspector Mitchell recognized immediately that intervention was not just advisable, but absolutely necessary. The situation had escalated beyond a private family disagreement into a public confrontation that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. "Princess Charlotte," Inspector Mitchell said, stepping forward with the calm authority that characterized royal protection officers in crisis situations, "I need you to step away from Her Majesty immediately. This conversation is over, and you need to come with me right now." The inspector's intervention sent a shock wave through the remaining guests, who suddenly realized that what they had been witnessing was not a charming family interaction, but a serious confrontation that required security intervention. The Duchess of Marlborough stepped back with obvious concern, and several other adults began to gather their children more urgently. Charlotte turned toward Inspector Mitchell with an expression of genuine surprise, as if she hadn't expected her behavior to result in official intervention. "Inspector Mitchell," she said with perfect politeness, "I don't understand why asking questions about family relationships requires security involvement. I haven't done anything wrong." "Princess Charlotte," Inspector Mitchell replied firmly, "you have been engaging in inappropriate and manipulative behavior toward Her Majesty throughout this event. That behavior ends now, and you will come with me immediately so that proper authorities can be notified." The mention of proper authorities sent a wave of understanding through both Camilla and Charlotte about the seriousness of the situation. Inspector Mitchell was not just intervening in a family disagreement. She was treating Charlotte's behavior as a security issue that required official documentation and response. Charlotte's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, revealing the 9-year-old child beneath the sophisticated exterior. "I want Papa," she said, her voice taking on the uncertain tone of a child who suddenly realized that she was in serious trouble. "I want to talk to Papa right now." "Your father will be contacted immediately," Inspector Mitchell assured her. "But first we need to ensure that this situation is properly contained and documented." "Your Majesty," she said, turning to Camilla, "I need to ask you to remain available for a full briefing about today's events." Camilla nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness about the way the afternoon had concluded. She had genuinely hoped to build a positive relationship with Charlotte, but the child's behavior had made that impossible. More concerning was the evidence that Charlotte was being coached by adults who were using her as a vehicle for their own grievances against current royal arrangements. As Inspector Mitchell prepared to escort Charlotte from the garden party area, the child made one final attempt to assert control over the situation. "This is exactly what Mama warned us about," she said, her voice carrying a combination of defiance and genuine distress. "She said that people who marry into our family sometimes try to silence those who ask difficult questions about their motivations and loyalty." The final reference to Diana's supposed warning struck Inspector Mitchell as the most troubling aspect of the entire confrontation. The idea that a deceased princess was being used to justify a child's manipulative behavior toward current family members suggested a level of adult interference that would require investigation by senior royal staff. "Princess Charlotte," Inspector Mitchell said firmly, "those kinds of comments are exactly why this situation requires immediate attention from your father and other appropriate adults. You are not responsible for fighting battles that belong to grown-ups, and you should not have been put in this position." As Inspector Mitchell led Charlotte away from the garden party area, several of her colleagues moved to secure the scene and begin the process of gathering statements from witnesses. The other protection officers had been monitoring the situation through radio communication, and they immediately implemented protocols designed to handle family conflicts that escalated beyond normal disagreements. Inspector Davies approached Camilla with the professional sympathy that characterized experienced royal protection officers. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "I want to assure you that Princess Charlotte's behavior this afternoon was completely inappropriate and will be addressed through proper channels. You should not have been subjected to this kind of treatment, especially in a public setting." Camilla appreciated the inspector's support, but she felt predominantly sad about the entire situation. "Inspector Davies," she replied thoughtfully, "I'm less concerned about my own treatment than I am about that child. She's clearly being influenced by adults who have equipped her with strategies and information that no 9-year-old should possess. This isn't really about me at all." The inspector nodded, having reached the same conclusion during his observation of the day's events. "We'll be conducting a full investigation into how Princess Charlotte was prepared for today's confrontation," he assured Camilla. "This level of sophisticated manipulation suggests adult involvement that raises serious concerns about the child's welfare." As the remaining guests were quietly ushered from the garden party area, word of the confrontation began to spread through the castle's staff and security personnel. The incident would require careful handling to prevent public disclosure while ensuring that appropriate steps were taken to protect both Charlotte and other family members from similar situations in the future. In her private study an hour later, Inspector Mitchell began composing the detailed report that would document the unprecedented events of the afternoon. Her years of experience had prepared her for many types of royal family conflicts, but She had never before witnessed a 9-year-old child conducting psychological warfare against a reigning queen with such sophistication and obvious adult coaching. The report would note Charlotte's strategic timing, her sophisticated use of philosophical arguments, her careful manipulation of public settings, and, most concerning, her repeated references to private information from her deceased mother that had clearly been interpreted and presented to her by adults with their own agenda. The inspector's professional assessment was that Charlotte had been systematically prepared for confrontation, possibly over a period of months or even years. Within hours, Prince William received an urgent call requesting his immediate presence at Windsor Castle to address the situation involving his daughter. The Prince of Wales arrived to find his child in the care of senior palace staff, looking small and confused in a way that reminded everyone present that despite her sophisticated behavior, Charlotte was still a 9-year-old girl who had been placed in an impossible position by the adults responsible for her guidance. The conversation between William and his daughter took place behind closed doors, but staff members reported that Charlotte's tears and her father's gentle but firm voice could be heard through the heavy oak doors of the private meeting room. When they emerged an hour later, Charlotte appeared subdued and genuinely remorseful, while William's expression revealed a mixture of anger and determination that suggested significant changes would be made to prevent similar incidents in the future. The aftermath of the garden party confrontation would lead to serious conversations within the royal family about boundaries, appropriate behavior, and the protection of children from adult conflicts. But, in the immediate moment, Inspector Mitchell's intervention had successfully prevented a tense family disagreement from escalating into a public relations disaster that could have had lasting consequences for everyone involved. The Royal Guard's decisive action had demonstrated that even within the complex dynamics of royal family relationships, there were lines that could not be crossed without consequence, and that protecting family members from manipulation and abuse was more important than maintaining polite fiction about perfect family harmony.